Yo, what's good? Welcome back to another episode of Levitation, the Sunday series where we're coming back with a good one, we're coming back with a great one, we're coming back with a banger. You feel what I'm saying? Before we get into it, I need you to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share it with others if you find it shareable. It helps, it goes a long way, and I appreciate it. Let's get into it. I hope it bless you. Look, we all have our reasons why we follow God. Some of us do it because of what He can provide. Some of us do it because of His familiarity. That's who our parents worship. That's who our parents' worship. And some of us do it because we realize that He is the one true God. And because of that, we choose to submit to His authority. None of these reasons are wrong. But I find that majority of us follow God in order to receive the rewards and the blessings that He can provide. Again, following God because of His provisions isn't necessarily wrong, but when you follow God only for what you can get, that's when it becomes the problem. When you only follow God because of what He could provide. The reason why that's dangerous is because sometimes following God does not result in what we perceive to be a reward. What if obedience to God results in your friends and family leaving you like Job? What if obedience to God results in your imprisonment like Paul? What if your obedience to God results in your death like Stephen, and most importantly, like our example, Yeshua? See, if we only follow God based off of the reward or the blessing, when we don't see that the reward and the blessing is attached to the obedience, we will start to regret and stop being obedient. So for that reason, we can't serve God and be obedient to God solely for the purpose of gaining a reward or getting a blessing. I'll be obedient to God because then I'll get my husband or my wife. I'll be obedient to God in this area because God will bless my finances. I'll be obedient to God because God is going to reward me with good health. None of that's promised. So if you're being obedient to God based off of the reward that you're looking for, what if your version of the reward is not the version that God wants to bless you with? Are you still willing to be obedient? So instead of being reward driven, we have to be process driven. Let me explain. I don't know if you ever noticed, but whenever God calls someone to do something for Him, He gave them a glimpse of the reward. But in order for them to get that reward, they had to go through a process. Nowhere in the Bible do you ever see God rewarding anybody without first taking them through a process. It's just not how He operates. Why? Because it's only when you go through the process, you will then be ready to receive the reward. He did this with everybody. He did it with Abraham, Moses, David, Joseph, Noah. I could go on and on and on. He did it with everybody. He called them. He gave them a glimpse of the promise. But before they got to the promise, they went through a tough process. But let's look at a group of people who were taken through a process, but because of their unwillingness to go through that process, it denied them the reward. Those group of people are the children of Israel. These children of Israel are slaves in Egypt. They cry out to the Lord. The Lord heard their cry. He sends out Moses to be their leader and to help them to be delivered from Egypt. God comes through and He does what He promised. He delivers them from the hand of Egypt and promises them the land of milk and honey, the promised land. This is the reward. But on their way to get to the reward, they had to go through the wilderness, the process. They faced many trials throughout the process. They came across water that was super bitter. God used Moses to help clear the water up so it became drinkable. When there wasn't any food, God provided manna and quail for them to eat. And despite God continuing to come through, these people complained and complained and complained all throughout their process, going as far to say that God should have let them stay in Egypt versus going through this process. But see, there's a reason for the process. The process exists so you can learn to depend on God, so you can outgrow negative and ungodly characteristics. And going through the process increases your willingness to be used. The children of Israel did the complete opposite. They didn't learn to depend and trust on God. They just continued to complain and doubt. They didn't get rid of the negative characteristics and habits that they developed in Egypt. They resorted back to them same things when they felt like God left them, and they were not willing to be used. Today, when we don't go through the process that God is trying to take us through, we start to reflect these same characteristics. And when we start to reflect these same characteristics, we put ourselves in position to forfeit the reward that God promised us for obedience. And this is what happened to the children of Israel. In Numbers chapter 14, starting at verse 20, it says, Then the Lord said, I will pardon them as you requested, but surely as I live, and as surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one of these people will ever enter that land. They have all seen my glorious presence, and the miraculous signs I performed both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice. They will never even see the land I swore to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. But my servant Caleb has a different attitude than the others have. He has remained loyal to me, so I will bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will possess this full share of that land. Because of their attitude about the wilderness, not only did it prolong the process, but it ended up costing them from even experiencing the end result of going through the process. They never made it to see the results. Why? Because their current situation, the process didn't look like the promise that God said. Going through the desert and going through the wilderness did not look like the promised land flowing with milk and honey. So the attitudes were bad. Why? Because they were reward driven. And that's what happens when we are reward driven. When we are obedient to God because we want the blessing and the reward. Whenever there's an instance where we don't feel like we are in the reward or we have come into the blessing, or if we feel like the blessing is too far away, it don't even look like it's possible, then we start to resort back to our old behavior and not obey God because we don't see the reward. But God wants you to obey no matter if the reward is right here or if it's 10 years from now. That's why we can never get to a point to where us as believers can start to see God's favor over our lives because we're not consistent enough in obedience to ever reach the reward. It's like exercising. Those people who only work out to only see physical results are less likely to ever reach the results. But those who fall in love with the process of working out, they didn't made it a daily routine. It's a lifestyle to work out. Those people will automatically see results because the results are attached to the work and the process. And that's the same way with God. God does want us to receive rewards and blessings. But if we are chasing after them, trying to avoid the process, then we will never get the reward that he wants us to come into. Because without the process, there is no reward. So we must fall in love with the character of God. We must fall in love with obeying God. Yes, it's difficult. Anything that's worth anything is difficult. We should start to fall in love with the process of obeying God. Not for what we can get, but because you understand and appreciate the change that's taking place in you. When we develop that perspective, we're going to start to obey God despite seeing the reward or not. So on our walk with God, there is nothing wrong with being encouraged with the rewards that God provides from obedience. But our reasons for obedience should be because we understand, we recognize, and we appreciate the change that God is doing in us because we are going through his process. So instead of being reward driven, we should be process driven. Just fall in love with the process. This is Levitation, where we're reaching our highest potential. Stay blessed.